I will ask our panelists to come up here and make some brief comments, and then we'll open up the floor for discussions. And I would like JP Eggers and Ola Henfridsson to stay on stage more or less. But I will give you the floor and I will give you the mic. So I think I will take our representatives from business to start. What's your reactions to these wise men's research?
Yeah, I need to. Let me comment on Mr. Eggers' presentation first. There you are. Sorry. Sorry. So my first reaction is that should I be afraid or should I be like enthusiastic? It's both. What is the hurdle of creating new business? What will it do to competition? I mean, on one side, it's super simple to start a business. But that makes my competition also. They will also have the possibility to bring in venture capital, buy market share, and so on. And but on another part, I mean, scale is it seems to be everything when it comes to the drone company. Somebody needs to build the engine, the cameras, and so on. Will that be one company in the world doing that? And what is so that's driving competition in another. So from a business perspective, I would be really scared. What is my value add when I outsource everything, becoming just a label on a sneaker or something? Is that something that you have reflected on, or?
Please come
answer now, or
please come up. Dialogue is better than monologue. So
no, I
then you need your.
Oh, I should use the mic back.
Are we still recording this, or?
Yeah, we are.
Okay, please. Is it on?
No, I got it. Yeah. That's a great point, and I think that's absolutely the right question to lead with in many ways. Should I be scared or should I be enthusiastic? And I think the reasons you're suggesting about the question, the reasons for concern are absolutely valid. I think in the end, I mean, as a strategy person, what I tell my students when we talk about this at any different level, it's about understanding the distinctive competencies of the organization, right? So the story would be, if you're a design firm, you need to make sure you're not outsourcing your design, right? But the question is, what about those competencies is actually distinctive? I'm good at it, and it adds some sort of unique value in the marketplace. And so for the drone example, right? If the story is, in the case of me offering it, I would get crushed by the competition because I have no competencies in design, in sales, or in marketing. But if I was the kind of person who, maybe I had a lot of government connections and I kind of could use that as a way to try and find contacts, that becomes the key piece that you focus around. And instead of me then spending my time thinking about how do I do production, how do I do distribution, how do I do operations, I get rid of all of that and I focus on that one thing that I am good at and that I can offer a unique value on. And that allows me to hold off the competition better because I'm actually focusing on developing and honing my competence if it really is what I'm good at. If I'm not actually good at it, then I'm in trouble. No question about that. Yeah.
Ola, you want to comment as well?
Yeah, I think
Stand up.
what's pretty interesting here is really you don't really fully need to have the master plan in a sense. I mean, you can be good at a few things and you can go with it in a sense. I think that with digital technology, that's possible because you don't need to know operations and a few other things. So in a sense, it really democratizes innovation in that sense. It really allows the entire room here to be able to be entrepreneurs in a sense that you wouldn't see before when capital was extremely important and so on and so forth. Doesn't mean that the other things are not still important, but still you can start with a smaller idea and you can change it if it doesn't work.
But you're right. The democratization in that process you're talking about is a terrifying thing from a competitive point of view. Yep.
Yeah.
So Magnus, do you want a follow-up question?
Thanks. Yeah, so it seems I guess a comment first. So one key question would be, what keeps people coming back to you, right? What keeps people from going somewhere else? Sorry. Better? Okay. I was thinking about the issue of trust because I think, so first of all, thanks a lot for great presentations. And it seemed to me when I tried to make sense of how your presentations connect, it seems like you, JP, were looking much more sort of, as you said, internally on what are the processes and the ways of conducting business that that you should be thinking about in terms of digitalization. And I think, Ola, you seem to be sort of illuminating more of the consequences. So in a way, perfect match and the right order to do it.
We planned that out perfectly.
Yeah. I saw you whispering here beforehand. But one thing that kept recurring to me was the issue of trust, and I'm very curious about what it is we're trusting, because we could say that we're trusting a platform, or we're trusting a referral system, or maybe if you could elaborate a bit on that, because I'm curious about whether, if it's not a collection of loosely connected phenomena that we're trusting, and whether we need, at least from a research point of view, new concepts. If it's really trust, or if we should talk about something else, if we should talk about, well, I guess the trust is the willingness to accept a risk in some sort of interaction, right? So I guess you could talk about it as trust, but maybe we also need to find new ways to describe this, because it seems to me that the combination of things that we're quote unquote trusting are what makes us able and willing to take risks. Maybe if you could comment on that. JP, but Ola as well.
Excellent question.
Yeah, it's where to even begin with this in some ways. I mean, so I guess in terms of, maybe I'll start with the idea about new concepts, right? So it's been around for a while, but in the last, I would say, 8 to 10 years, the economists have started really talking about relational contracts, right? It's kind of this term that's been used a lot in economics. And again, it's been around for decades, but it's really become a big issue in recent years. And to some extent, it reflects a very classic economics view of the world, which is the idea of the relational contract is basically, we have made idiosyncratic investments in working with each other that diminishes the appeal of working with someone else, right? It's kind of like, if you and I have figured out how to work together in some ways, then it's just not worth you going and all of a sudden trying to work with him or with somebody else, because you and I are just different, and we've got these idiosyncrasies that kind of make this work out in some way. And the question then becomes, how do these contracts and how do these idiosyncrasies kind of emerge, and how do they affect our relationship? So, I mean, the economist answer would mostly be, trust is basically this belief that it is in the other party's best interest to fulfill the deal, right? And so you want to put yourself consistently in situations where it's not just in your best interest, but in their best interest as well. That does mean you have to shift this from being, it no longer becomes about, I'm going to sign a deal where I'm going to take advantage of the partner. It becomes about, it has to be good for them too, right? That actually has to create value for them to want to be in this relationship. And if I have that confidence that they're going to want to fulfill this deal, then I can trust their behavior. It's a very economics type of an answer. It's not a sociological, psychological. There's no emotion, there's no relationship in this relational contract, but that's kind of what they would typically be offering. I think we know a lot about trust and a lot, from a more psychological perspective, but I think this layering of the relational contract and kind of thinking very clearly when you're engaging in one of these interactions about their motivation, what it is they're hoping to get out of it, and why they would or wouldn't want to fulfill what I need out of this contract. And try and find relationships where, again, it's in both parties' best interest to deliver and deliver well.
Would you like to comment as well, Ola? Or?
I'm not a trust expert, but one thing that is pretty clear anyway is just telling a small anecdote. I was part of the team that came to GM. There was a time I worked for Victoria Institute, and we did contract research for GM, trying to convince their lawyers that they need to have a third-party developer program. And of course, the lawyers, they treated this as, any relationship, with the vendors. They came with like 200-300 pages of terms and conditions. And so that's the way that they wanted to handle the relationships. And of course, they wouldn't work with third-party developers. So the way they would do it in such a setting is, of course, establishing, that review system in a way that you have a minimal and you allow vendors to take market risk in a sense. So if you put like 10 navigation systems on an open car platform, for instance, you would have competition, between traditional suppliers on the platform, allowing the customer having a choice, but also allowing the service providers to compete on that platform. That would be ideal in a sense, but that's so different in a way. So obviously, without knowing too much about trust, certainly we handle, I think, with the digital technologies, those kind of relationships in a very different way. And yeah.
If I may do a small reflection myself on this, as an economist, we have this Nobel laureate Ronald Coase, and he did this famous paper in 1937 already, explaining the nature of the firm, basically saying we need firms when transaction costs are high. So in situation with high transaction costs, we will need big firms. When transaction costs fall, the size of firms will decrease, and that's what we're seeing now. But the interesting point, I think, is that in branding, trust, reputation, there are enormous economies of scale. So, and chicken or egg problems of enormous problems. So it's hard to enter a market where trust is important, reputation is important. So that's, I think, the way for established firms to keep up their position. It's hard to enter a market where trust is important, and there are important scale economies here.
Which connects directly to the idea that what you want to do is you want to reduce the risk of taking a bet on the chicken or the egg, right? You want to lower the trust needed to take a chance on someone.
But that also speaks to this idea that, as you were kind of pointing out, that one of the key, if we're thinking about from a core competencies perspective, right? What does the firm have to offer?
Mm-hmm.
What it may have to offer is an established reputation, a set of contacts who do trust them and who kind of, who believe in that. And this is, I do a case with my MBA students on Alibaba, right? And when Alibaba starts off, they're doing business-to-business marketplace and financial institutions and all kinds of stuff. And the underlying theme across all of these is they are trust and relationship-driven businesses. And what really it is you're going to trust us as an organization because you know us from other businesses, and now then we can sell you other things as well. This is maybe what's leading to some of this stratification with a lot of these small companies who are piggybacking in this kind of way off of the Googles with the Google Maps and the API. It's like, if my website has some random mapping thing on it that I've never heard of, I may not trust them. But the minute I see Google Maps pop up as part of the API for one of these companies, it's like, oh, they're working with Google. This must be, you may not know anything about writing using the API programming to kind of get in there, but it's like, now it's like this adds a degree of credibility that you can kind of piggyback on in that way. Yeah.
Trust referral.
Yeah, I think so, right? I mean, again, it's like that's the piece you're offering.
Sorry.
Too many academics discussing too many things. Yeah.
Oh my God, it's about keeping the customer, isn't it? I mean, having enough trust. And when I listen to you, you are enabling a platform or a digitalization or a marketplace where you actually you don't have to have a personal relationship. You can trust the ones on Upwork,
yeah.
So you have a broader market. When I have business-to-business relationships, they always end up with like 3 potential partners to select from, which are good enough, we can trust them, and they have good enough pricing. So how to select from them? And now with the digitalization, that potential number of players increases quite a lot. And another reflection is that who owns the customer? With the componentization of you have a service which is based on Google and blah blah blah. Who does the customer see as the vendor? We have that problem as a mobile operator. We think that if you have bought a subscription from us, you are a customer to us. But that's not true. You have bought an iPhone, so you are more loyal to the phone than you are to the carrier. So it's a duality. So I think it's, when I look out, it's not clear who is the customer and who is the vendor, who to blame and so on. Is that something that shows up in this kind of?
I can.
Apparently a good question.
I mean, to some extent, this is why, in the spirit of kind of new terms, at least from an academic perspective, the language has shifted from being about suppliers, customers, vendors, things like that, to this ecosystem perspective, which is everyone fills multiple roles in that environment. Depending upon how you want to look at it, if you look at any one player, yeah, they've got some suppliers and they've got some customers. But if you look at the whole thing, there's an interweaving in there that goes on. And I think that reflects this recognition that it's not as simple as it used to be, right? Where it was either we had this very clear vertically integrated firm and we had our own operations, and maybe we had some outside vendors or some customers, but they were very distinct. We knew who they were in that point of view, and it's no longer clear. And I think that's a good thing. But I think we need to recognize that changes the way we have to think about relationships with the customers, as you're saying. As for who owns the customer, I mean, to some extent, I'll come back to the idea. It's kind of like whose value proposition revolves around their relationship and their ability to know the customer, build a relationship with them, and relies upon the data from the customer transaction. That's who needs to own the customer, right? If you need to really understand the customer to generate the next round of innovation, then it's incumbent upon you to have that relationship. If you don't need to know the customer, but you can, through your partners, get access to whatever you need knowledge-wise to help you be innovative, then you can let them fight over who's going to own the downstream customer in some ways. So at the end consumer, right? I mean, so everyone has to own a relationship with their customer, right?
Yes, of course.
But the end consumer, everyone doesn't need to fight over that in every case because you're getting good enough signals flowing through the supply chain in theory. But
an interesting thing is that when it was YouTube that has the crash this summer,
Yeah.
it's basically stopped. And what did our customers do? They called us. What are you doing? So even though that we don't have any control of that, I mean, we get the blame for.
Yep.
So it's also in the perception of the user. What are we responsible of?
I think what digital technology does is also, for those who are computer scientists, it's a very layered architecture in a sense. And those, we used to think about industries as verticals. There was a transportation industry, there were automotive, there were banking, and so on and so forth. But digital technology cuts across. And it also means that, on top of your infrastructure, virtual operators and others can build their business. And, of course, the closer you are to the services, the more chances really that you can actually develop value in a sense. So I guess that for you guys, it must be, you want to come closer to the, to those customers, I guess, in many ways. And what they do on YouTube is important for you. But as long as you only want to support their, their access to internet via 4G or something, if that's the focus, it'll be tricky. And I think the same kind of responsibility issues you see in the car industry when they bring digital on board. We're very used to the fact that, software can crash or something and you just have a new update or something. But in their business, it's terrible if a new car, crashes, or even, if it's only a small fault, it's still something that you don't want to associate with the brand. But still bringing in those kind of technology and that logic is really a difficult challenge because people will blame them.
So I'll let Magnus Mähring have a last question from the panel. You may come back later, but then we'll open up to the audience. But I know you have some more comments. So please.
Let me see if I can connect to what we're talking about now. I guess another reflection would be, both of you are very much talking about the fact that you can disaggregate the firm. You don't need to do the stuff that you can buy, right? And you can buy more and more stuff. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of interesting because if you go back not so far in time, let's say 10 years, a lot of companies had the impression that they built competitive advantage through building superior processes, right? And now basically, in a way, reality is telling a lot of these companies that, well, not really. You can just use any standard process. Here's a list. You can, buy the one you like, right? So where is the building of competitive advantage going, right? is it going just to one or two core capabilities, or what's going to happen?
So I'll make the distinction between kind of the within versus the across, right? So within any given function, maybe within a certain product or a certain whatever it might be, there's the capability to deliver on that in the current moment, and being able to be innovative in the future, right? That's the type of thing that most research has shown that focus firms do better at, in the sense that if they focus on just that one within, whatever it is, they will be better, they will sense better, they'll understand things better, and they'll make better investments. The across then is, how do I then link those pieces all together, right? Whether it be across functions, across products, across partners, whatever it might be. I think you're right. I think there's a way in which we used to talk a lot about, maybe this is a symptom of fads in management to some extent. Maybe it's not. We'll find out in the future. But that these process investments, these coordination investments within the firm were kind of a core piece of the capability of the firm. I think the argument would mostly be that building the ability to coordinate within the firm and building the ability to coordinate across firm boundaries are kind of analogous capabilities. If the firm does too many things with itself, then it won't be the leader in each of those specialized areas. It should focus on which one or ones it really is a leader on, outsource the rest, but the capabilities it then needs to build are no longer kind of internal coordination ones, they're external ones. So it changes the nature of the discussion from being about how do I coordinate divisions in a multi-business organization to how do I coordinate across the partners in my ecosystem, right? It's a different but related set of capabilities, and it's still incredibly important. And there are some players, I think, who have and will continue to build their advantage almost solely based around that ability. They are the orchestrators who can run the entire community. They don't actually add direct value to any one of them. But that's a challenge, right? Because everybody has to be pretty good at doing those things, or else they cede too much control to those coordinators.
You want to add something to this, Ola? Or?
No, I mean, we used to teach about best practices and so on and so forth, and I guess that's more bread and butter kind of services nowadays. And I think it's probably because if the processes are so digitized, and that idea came from a time when digital was a support technology of manual processes. In many cases now, you couldn't imagine the process we have, without digital technology, which makes a difference. Given that material compared to the traditional company's material is so much more flexible, it doesn't make sense to standardize processes, in that way. You need to be able to innovate them, when you have a signal from the market, you need to be able to reshape them. Then you cannot, certify processes for like 18 months or something. It doesn't make sense. So it might make sense if you are in the, nuclear power station business or something, but in very risky businesses in a sense.
So I will open up for questions from the audience here. I like the way Magnus Berg here started out saying, guys, you missed something really important here, so take the chance now. Please present yourself.
Hi, Stefan Movin from Marketing Technology Center. I think it's quite interesting with the digital ventures and going this for customer base. But as you mentioned, Ola, digital ventures build on infrastructure companies in one way or another.
Yeah.
How should an infrastructure company look on digital ventures? How should the infrastructure companies view the building of an ecosystem compared to digital ventures? Because they want to own the customer base, they want to build digital ventures themselves. How should a infrastructure company act and think strategically?
I wish I had very good, clear-cut answers on that one. I mean, that's a struggle, of course. But I think that, if you think about 3, for instance, as a mobile operator, I would say that, of course, what they already do, I mean, a part of trying to build that user, direct, contact with an end user and trying to build that user base. I think there is an emerging one, namely, those who want to build businesses on their infrastructure, in a sense, who also can be another customer group. So I think that, in a sense, the flexibility that being an important infrastructure provider here, allows should be used in many different ways. What I think they've done, but I don't know, I lost contact with the with the operators a few years ago. But I think they've tried to focus, and cut costs and very much. Maybe that's not entirely true.
Of course, the competition in mobile is completely crazy. So
Yeah.
we have no chance if we don't are super mean and lean.
Yeah.
But we are also trying to build different models like MVNOs. I think we have 3 or 4 in Sweden.
I think that's a good example. I mean, Michael Tushman, for instance, we would say that you need to be dexterous. Very difficult word, but be able to explore and exploit at the same time. So it would be like exploiting your current core skills in a sense, and be very lean on that. And at the same time, you need to invent new ways to use that infrastructure in smart ways that we haven't really. And that's probably what you do, and that's probably a way of survival. But in a sense, I mean, mostly we study companies that build on top of infrastructure, so I don't have any clear-cut answers. And I think it's a difficult dilemma, I would say, because the risk is also that the infrastructure becomes outdated, and you made large investments in something that can be overthrown by other. I think that's a major risk.
And I have a comment also. I think that is a very dangerous. It's very very high risk that when you are a big infrastructure vendor, you become, we can do it ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's really dangerous if you think that you can do something that you cannot do. And that has been failing for quite many operators trying to do things that should not be done by the operator.
I think you need to remember one thing. If you think about the history of telecommunications, it used to be, at least in Sweden, we know that. At one point, services, telecom services was provided by one company, and even the devices, the phones, needed to be bought from this company. At that time, operators were king in a sense. Infrastructure was king. It was really because the intelligence was very long. It was really in the network in a sense, very far. So if you want to program, if you wanted to do anything as an end user. I mean, at some point you could, you can have voice calls and so on and so forth, those kind of services. But it really required lots of programming in the networks. Of course, partly why infrastructure companies have struggling now is very much because of the power of end user computing, in the sense that it's really the intelligence is in the edges of the network, where with the devices, the reprogramming and so on and so forth. Instead of being in the center. So I think that's the kind of background. We've seen that development over time. Because it used to be that everybody came to you and really, was really the biggest, strongest partner. Yep.
Andreas Giorgio, I'm a researcher here at Ratio. Thank you for very interesting presentations and an interesting discussion. You haven't said so explicitly, but I got the feeling that there was a consensus in the panel and among the presenters that there's an increasing returns to digitalization in companies. I listened recently to one of the up-and-coming names in Swedish Entrepreneurial Society. It's the CEO and founder of Happy Plugs, the earplug successful company. I think they sell headphones to iPhones and other devices, one each second or something like that. And he was telling an audience about his journey. And he started off as an entrepreneur in digital services, and developed a Facebook similar service that was about to launch 3 months after Facebook was launched, and he was completely devastated and draw the conclusion after that I will never go 100% digital. So my question to you is there increasing returns to digitization, or is there a tipping point after digitization becomes or turns into negative returns?
I think we want to. I think to be careful, you want to distinguish between value creation and value appropriation. So, from a value creation perspective, I think there are increasing returns to digitization. Right? Digitization creates value in ways that traditional businesses never were able to do, and kind of changes the nature of the way consumers interact with technology and the opportunities that are out there for us to kind of lead a better life and have better access. Maybe we don't like the fact that we stare at Facebook too much or whatever, but like in theory, it creates value for, that's out there. There maybe are very clearly diminishing returns there at some point. But then to your point earlier, Magnus, in the beginning of this discussion, the fact that digitization makes imitability so much easier, right? It makes it so much easier for other people to gain access to some of these tools. If you don't have a true competitive advantage, you don't have that unique capability, then your ability to appropriate some of that value and actually be profitable as a firm is going to be dramatically compromised. And I think what we've seen is a real shift in who captures the value that's being created with digitization. So like a great example to think about is the recorded music industry, right? So the music industry, it used to be for the most part, the artist would make a fair amount of money, the songwriters would make some money, the labels would make a lot of money, right? And they mostly made money by selling albums. They went on tour in order to sell more albums. Digitization comes along and Spotify and Pandora and everything else kind of changes the nature of what goes on in that industry. And it creates more value. It gives us access to music we never would have had before, but it also redistributes who gets that value in the chain in pretty important ways. And it partly is based upon who sits on the bottleneck, who kind of controls access to certain key resources, who's really good at doing and delivering certain things. And I think just being aware of, yes, digitization is going to can create real value out there, but it also is going to dramatically shift who gets that value, who appropriates that in terms of profitability.
Okay, I have one more question here, and then I'll like to have more entrepreneurs asking questions. So,
thank you very much. Jakob Dex, I'm at 6 Swedish ICT. First of all, there was a term that wasn't used before, but I want to introduce it. It's called digital anxiety, which is what companies feel when they are feeling that they need to restructure to cope with digitization. It's a term we've been using loosely at least at 6. But I wanted to comment on Ola's, you said that infrastructure used to be king and isn't in the same way. But we still see that the platform owners are the ones that are starting to dictate terms when it comes to who can establish on the market. You see that with Tesla, with the charging poles for cars. You see it with Google on their various platforms. You see it with Facebook and their Internet Basic in India and very, very many other examples. And the EU is also starting to try to figure out how they actually regulate platforms, especially the competition commissioner is doing a lot of work in trying to figure out that. So where do you see the owning of infrastructure heading with platforms developing?
Well, essentially, I look at platform as something, it's a layer on top of, what I classical would call infrastructure. But of course, I mean, if you look at platforms, we used to have like production, product lines kind of platforms. In the car industry, you have those kind of platforms. So you, develop a number of different brands can share the same chassis, engine, and so on and so forth. Maybe like Volkswagen would have like 4 different platforms. There is a limit to the scope of variation. You do that in order to be able to, on mass scale, produce a number of components and get economics of scale for that, and then be able to vary something features that is appealing to customers and so on, and makes a car what it is compared to another car. I think that's very different. I think those kind of platforms are still operating in the old way, in a sense. Well, if you think about the platforms, if you think about it, using a term from economics like double-sided markets, looking at platform as markets is a different thing. And I think that's perhaps that's something I should have mentioned to you as well as the infrastructure provider. What you want to do, of course, is to become someone where companies are coming and using their intellectual capacity to dream up new services and applications that can work on top of your platform. And you wouldn't be able, if you look at the car companies, for instance, they have full departments of infotainment engineers. They're dreaming up functionality that future car users can use. But of course, it would be so much better to open up that to market, but that would be a huge thing. And that's probably true in many instances you could open up. So I'm not sure. I mean, I think that being able to establish the same as a platform is probably the thing you want to do. I mean, many of the biggest companies you have today are platform businesses. It's just that I think it's very difficult for everyone to become a platform. Of course, we can see different ways of piggybacking on a platform. Being able to, choosing a platform is partly choosing your business partners, and you put your intellectual capacity in the hands of that platform to some extent, and perhaps you can be a sub-platform within that one. I don't know, but an anxiety thing, I'm not sure I can connect to
JP?
here.
I'll try and be real quick. I would say, back to kind of basic strategy issues, the firm that controls kind of the rare and valuable resources is the one who's going to capture the value in this case, right? So if there are 5 firms who all offer the exact same infrastructure pipeline, who can offer the exact same services, none of them is going to make any money over their cost of capital because they're offering the exact same thing. So the question is, what are you offering? What do you have that's valuable that customers that will actually want and are willing to pay for? If you offer the best pipeline, maybe you're in good shape. If you offer the cheapest pipeline, maybe you're also in good shape. Or maybe it's back to reputation and the relationship with the customers, or it's the content that you can layer on top of that in some way. So I think that's why one of the reasons why I think infrastructure is no longer as easily guaranteed as being kind of key to survival and success as it used to be, because many more firms have access to similar infrastructure out there, and just because you own it doesn't mean you're going to make a lot of money off of doing that.
Okay, I'll take a last question here from the audience, and then I will let any one of you, if you want to make a last comment, have a word. So please.
Anders Östlund from RISE, and I actually have 2 questions. One is spinning what you were mentioning, and a little way what you answered right now, but I guess what the customer wants is really what, regardless if it's a digital business or traditional business, that's really kind of what the key is. So the question is really, I mean, Apple is more of a traditional business, and that's probably the most successful company for the last 5-10 years in terms of profitability and also market cap. So and that's more of a traditional company.
Well, they are and they aren't, right? They're not a digital company in the sense that they're like Facebook offering a digital tool. They have iTunes and things like that is a big deal. But they are a non-traditional one in the sense that they actually have been relying upon outside partners in the way I was kind of laying out before, far more than they did 10 years ago, and than most firms did 10, 15 years ago. I mean, they don't do any manufacturing. They use third-party developers for a lot of the software. They're relying upon content coming from movie companies and music labels and things like that. They're a design shop, right? They're a design shop and a retail store. That's really what they're good at, and they've focused on those things. Those happen to be not directly digital activities, but enabled by and related to it. So I guess it depends on how you want to think about traditional versus kind of new. I think about them as being new because they're totally capitalizing on the power of the digital tools to focus on what they're good at and get rid of the rest of the stuff. But they're not a digital company in the sense like a Facebook.
And my second question then, we talked about the new businesses a lot, and but there's the digitalization will have a big shift for the traditional businesses as well, and they are scared to death right now. They don't really know what to do. When the electrical motor came, it took 40 years to actually replace the steam engine motors in the factories, because it was kind of the generation of the operators in the factories. The new companies, the traditional companies, cannot wait 40 years now. So how should they organize to actually be able to succeed in this change of digitalization?
Humble little question. Yeah. So we're looking forward to your answers.
Yeah, I can say a few words from an automotive standpoint, because that's been probably working for you at some time, since I was at the Victoria Institute like 7 years ago or something, but which is part of RISE or owned by RISE. I think that one thing that they're doing wrong currently in the automotive industry is really that they're treating like Apple and Apple Play, for instance, as a vendor, as any alliance. They're thinking very short-sighted in a way by saying that this is what customers want to have in their car, and they're allowing Apple to tap into their ecosystem, more and more, and that's true for many other areas as well. Maybe that's it's a consequence of focus, but on the other hand, what you want to do is, of course, to take care of some of the unique features of actually driving. you know, where you would be able to allow, there is a context, you know, for driving and digital services that can be developed, you know, with sensor systems in the car, you know, types of data that only the car maker actually have access to. But what are they doing? They are kind of just allowing, you know, a bigger screen in the car, selling exactly what they've sold all the time, hardware. You know, so maybe with a bigger screen or with more penetration, I will have a margin from that screen. Essentially, that's so they're keeping the old business model, because the other way of turning it around would demand different business models, which is seems to be very difficult. So maybe, you know, there's a need of Tesla or someone else to turn that around in a sense and offer models where it would be totally natural to, you know, for instance, as I mentioned earlier, why wouldn't you have competition of different navigation systems on my platform? That would be so much more attractive, both for customers and for it would really put a pressure on tier one suppliers too, which most OEMs are in the hands of. You know, they are in the hands of Denso and others, and Apple nowadays, and soon Google. And you know, with self-driving cars, it'll soon be, you know, it's interesting with Volvo having a collaboration now with Uber, at least, and what, you know, we don't know where that's going, but that's interesting at least. And yeah.
So I'll try and, maybe if you were offering the more specific examples, I'll try and offer at least a little more general perspective on it. I mean, to some extent, this is why I kind of gave some examples of some of these smaller firms, because this kind of, I think, is meant to suggest and be indicative of the power and the opportunities that are out there that maybe big firms just haven't really thought through, right? And the challenge is that the political structures, the reporting structures, the nature of authority in kind of large hierarchical organizations is all built around the old business model, right? It's built around the way business has been done before, and as a result, the new opportunities and new technologies are being kind of plugged in modularly. It's like, we'll pull this thing out, we'll put this thing in, and we'll just replace it that way. As opposed to stepping back and saying, now that I have this, now that there's these new tools, new opportunities, new technologies out there, how should I, if I was going to go back and just wipe everything clean, and I started a company who kind of was vaguely in my space right now, capitalizing on whatever I'm good at right now, what would that look like, right? And then the question is, how do I move in that direction? How do I kind of get there in some way? So it's kind of like, not what was I good at before that the market found valuable? What am I good at now that the market will actually find to be of value? How do I organize the firm to capitalize, keep, sustain, and kind of continue to develop that in some way? And the stuff that I am not good at, how do I just get rid of it in some way? I mean, you know, it's not like it's not like it goes away. It's not irrelevant, but it's no longer as central for me to be doing it, or at least not for me to be focusing my continuous investment efforts on doing that. But it requires a real ability to kind of step back and say, look, what am I good at that people actually care about now and will care about 5 years from now, and not be hung up on what the past was like. That's way easier said than done. I mean, obviously, but I think, you know, it's like, again, how do you move past the 1.0, just swapping out what was there for what's there now, to actually becoming kind of a transformed organization, requires you to think differently about what that looks like. The specifics are kind of easier to kind of think through in some ways, but generally that's kind of, I think, where it has to go.
Very good. Do we have some last comments from Magnus and Magnus? You're always tempted, Magnus.
I wanted to say this. I think you are wrong.
Okay.
Because I think you should not only focus on what you are good at, but you have to identify what you have to be good at and become good at that. And that is what Apple did. They saw that there was no aggregator of applications, but they saw that that is a business segment that will, of course they were not good at that, but they saw that, terminals, nobody will care, the application, that will be a lot, but we will be the marketplace, so we need to be good at that. So of course, focus on what you're good at, but also identify what you need to be good at. I think that is important.
Yeah, no, agreed.
Very good comment, Magnus.
I was just thinking from an incumbent perspective, faced with the challenge of sort of rethinking what are your important capabilities and your important resources, and probably then trying to divest the resources that would keep you from changing, right? So it just seems to me that that means that you have to think a lot about services, and you probably have to think a lot about data generation. You have to sort of try to figure out what, with our specific knowledge of the industry or of the customer, what can we envision, where can we envision generating data from whatever we're doing or could be doing that we can turn into valuable services. Would that, because that seems to me to be at least one possible angle. What do you think?
I mean, I certainly think that the availability of the data and the transformation of the digital technologies will kind of change. So let me just briefly use eBay and PayPal, right? So when eBay starts out and creates PayPal, it creates PayPal to solve a specific need in the market, but it's kind of like, we're eBay, we just need this thing to help us solve this kind of loophole. And what happens over time is between Amazon and Alibaba and everything else that's out there, the uniqueness of eBay goes down, but the importance of PayPal starts to go up, right? And it's this realization that what was kind of this add-on peripheral thing originally is now actually the core thing of what we actually offer. We need to be building around that, get rid of the eBay thing, focus on the PayPal.
I think that was a very good ending of this very excellent seminar, I think. Very, very, very stimulating. And I think these technologies, various different technologies, affect us all. It's really disruptive. So I think all of us have been deliberating, reflecting about these insights that you all have provided us with, and it gives food for thought. And for the reception that we will have here in a few minutes, and I will like to welcome some of the participants for the research conference over the weekend here. We have planned to do this in Swedish. It turned out to be given in English, but who knows? So I will end by giving all participants a big thank you for coming here, but especially the keynote speakers and the panelists, a big hand for giving us all these good ideas and insight. Thank you. And you're all welcome to stay around and continue the discussion. So.